Anthony Albanese enters the history books while Peter Dutton exits the parliament. Labor's landslide election win and the coalition's crushing defeat last night reshapes the political terrain. This morning, as the dust settles, we'll hear from all sides. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Australia's waking up this morning to a new political reality. The Albanese government is back and in a far stronger position, winning a second term and a much bigger majority than anyone expected. At the close of counting last night, Labor was on 85 seats, well above the required majority of 76. And this could go even higher. The coalition struggling on just 36, with 10 crossbenchers and 19 seats still in doubt. Labor's primary vote has lifted to 34.7% at the moment. The coalition reduced to its lowest vote on record of less than 32%. After preferences, it's a swing of more than 3% right now to Labor, which sits on 55.5% of the coalition's 44.5%. Among the coalition casualties, of course, Peter Dutton himself. The opposition leader lost his seat of Dixon, which means a humbled Liberal Party must now find a new leader from its depleted ranks. The party also needs to find a completely new direction after one of its worst results on record. The Greens have lost some seats, while more independents could be on their way to Parliament. But it was the Labor faithful celebrating the hardest last night.
You should feel a sense of satisfaction.
Let's make sure that we can get this great country back on track.
So we can keep building for our future. Where's our diesel?
After 5 weeks of campaigning, Election Day is here.
It is time now for Australia to vote.
When millions of Australians are waking up and heading to the polls this morning to cast their vote.
Finally, I get disciplined with you people. What are you like?
Game day at the G, you must be feeling confident.
Game day, and we're at time on in the fourth quarter now. It's up to the Australian people.
Please vote for your National and Liberal candidates and we'll deliver.
Thanks for your help in democracy.
Say democracy!
Democracy! Who'd you vote for, Mr. Dutton?
If we don't win this booth, we're in real trouble.
I voted for him.
We've sold out the sausages.
We sold out very quickly.
That's a great sign.
What do you have
You just upset me dog there.
Looking forward to the outcome tonight.
It's now up to the people. We'll wait and see what the outcome is.
It all comes down to this.
Breaking news now, polls are closed and the vote count is about to begin.
We're playing defence in a lot of places.
Clearly, there were some hiccups during the campaign.
We are seeing some green shoots in seats that are really unlikely.
With the massive pre-poll vote, which is up considerably, I think that is an extra reason for caution across the board.
There is a very narrow pathway. It's a goat track. There's lots of billy goats on it and lots of rock slides.
Some fresh numbers, they're flooding in now.
I'm not calling anything just yet, but I'm just seeing a lack of good news, which is what we often say early when it comes to the coalition.
Admittedly, with all those pre-polls, with all those postals, these are looking good for the Labor Party without being anywhere near calling this election.
2 miracles?
I think we believe in miracles, but it's tough.
This is going to be a thumping.
And let's wait till pre-poll comes in.
Deakin, Bruce, Holt, Aston, in almost every booth, we're now seeing primary vote swings to Labor. So what Jane was saying earlier in the night looks like on these early numbers will not be borne out in Victoria.
I can't see how the coalition gets into government from the numbers we're seeing at the moment.
No path to victory for the coalition at all tonight.
For pre-poll to turn around from here, they'd have to have a lot of loaves and fishes, I think. I think it's a big swing that's on at the moment.
Anthony Albanese will again be Prime Minister of Australia.
Please welcome my dear friend, our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
What we're seeing here, you'd have to call a Labor landslide.
We all knew what was going to happen. We all knew Labor Party were going to win. Not by this much.
Peter Dutton is in really, really big trouble.
We've called it. We believe that Ali Franz will win Dixon.
He has lost his seat as leader of the Liberal Party. 3, 2, 1.
Throw the ball.
Oh,
it is.
Remarkable.
And off he goes.
Now, we didn't do well enough during this campaign. That much is obvious tonight, and I accept full responsibility for that. I want to say thank you to the Australian people for the faith they've placed in me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Australians have chosen a majority Labor government
with faith in the fair go and faith in each other. We return to the work of building Australia's future. Thank you all.
And our guests this morning in an extended 90-minute edition, Treasurer Jim Chalmers, Keith Wolahan, one of the Liberal MPs who looks like he's lost his seat last night, and Independent MP Zali Steggall. First, let's check some of the post-election front pages this morning. Albo easy, says the Sunday Herald Sun in Melbourne. And the Sunday Age highlights Labor's sea of red. Peter Harcher says in the paper Anthony Albanese cemented Labor in the commanding centre, while the Liberal Party has been reduced to a right-wing populist party, all but exiled from the biggest cities. No Duts, no glory, says the Sunday Mail in Adelaide. And in the top end, no Duts about it, says the Territorian. Here were the two leaders last night.
Now, we didn't do well enough during this campaign. That much is obvious tonight, and I accept full responsibility for that. Earlier on, I called the Prime Minister to congratulate him on his success tonight. It's an historic occasion for the Labor Party, and we recognise that. I congratulated the Prime Minister and wished he and Jodie and Nathan all the very best. And I said to the Prime Minister that his mum would be incredibly proud of his achievement tonight, and he should be very proud of what he's achieved.
Australians have chosen to face global challenges the Australian way, looking after each other while building for the future. And to serve these values, meet these challenges, seize these opportunities and build that better and stronger future, Australians have chosen a majority Labor government.
Well, let's go first to our reporters who were covering the leaders last night. Jane Norman is at Kirribilli House in Sydney and Olivia Casely's in Brisbane. Very good morning to both of you. Jane, to you first. You were there last night. The Prime Minister, he really couldn't hide his joy in that speech, could he?
He could barely fight back the tears as he walked on stage last night, Spearsy. In his words, a majority Labor government promised and delivered. In other words, he's upheld his side of the bargain. He had a plan and he executed it. Now, this morning, Anthony Albanese is waking up behind me at Kirribilli House, perhaps for a moment wondering if his historic victory was all a dream. The first Prime Minister in 21 years to win a consecutive election. Labor, the first government in decades to win a second term with an increased majority. Yes, the internal and published polls were all pointing to a Labor victory last night, but nobody, not even the numbers men in the party, were expecting the scale of this victory. Last night, one Labor insider even said they think they might have just secured a third term, and it wasn't hubristic. It was because of the scale of the victory, the numbers and the fight back now for the coalition. Now, the party was just buzzing. It started with a lot of anxiety and nerves in the room and ended up with just pure jubilance. There were tears and beers flowing. One MP said to me they could finally put the 2019 shock loss to bed. Now, we will be hearing from the Prime Minister later today, likely with a media event in Grayndler.
All right, we'll keep an eye out for that. Liv, a very different scene last night in Brisbane. Peter Dutton lost not only the election, but his seat. What's the chatter now about the next Liberal leader?
Well, the chatter's well and truly begun. In fact, it started before the polls closed. Senior Liberals were last night arranging informal meetings for today to discuss the leadership, sensing the inevitable. The truth is, Peter Dutton was always on borrowed time. He had a very high watermark to hit in order to retain his leadership, about 10 seats. As we know, he fell spectacularly short of that ambition, even booted out of his own seat of Dixon. Ultimately, some of the names being put forward include the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor, the Deputy Opposition Leader, Susan Lee, Shadow Defence Minister, Andrew Hastie, as well as the Shadow Immigration Minister, Dan Tehan. Speaking with Liberal sources, though, it's clear there's no obvious heir apparent, because this is about a lot more than just who leads next. It's about what the Liberal Party actually stands for in 2025 in the wake of its resounding defeat. And this morning, there's a lot of party members scratching their heads at that very question.
Hey Liv, happy birthday to you. Thanks to you and Jane Norman for joining us this morning. Appreciate it. Well, this was an election result that tells us a great deal about Australia. The electorate has opted for stability in a time of global uncertainty. It's also strongly embraced a Labor agenda that was focused on greater government support for Medicare, childcare, housing. And voters have, of course, rejected the Liberal Party in droves. Indeed, the Liberals now find themselves in need of a new leader and a complete reset. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this morning by David Crowe, Samantha Maiden and Jacob Greber. Thank you all for joining us here in the ABC Election Centre, which has been reset for us this morning. What a result. There's so much to unpack, and I'm glad we've got the 90 minutes to do that this morning. Let me just get some quick headline thoughts on what we saw last night, David.
OK, well, it's truly historic. We can see the parallel, or the way it's reshaped everything in a way that hasn't been seen for 20 years or more. There were clearly some major failings on the coalition side, and that was being explored even before the outcome. Voters didn't warm to Peter Dutton. They didn't like the nuclear policy. They liked the delivery of government services from Labor and this assurance about what the government could do for them. They also had Donald Trump hanging over the election, and that was a major factor that worked for the government, all of those things. But also I think there was a positive message from Anthony Albanese that projected confidence, and that was assuring voters that things would get better, and that was vital after 3 years of household pain with living standards. Announcement after announcement after announcement, Labor presented the forward offer where things were going to get better. They lifted up on the confidence front, and Peter Dutton had a message of anger over cost of living and anxiety about the future. Big contrast.
Sam, how would you explain or describe what just happened?
Well, I think the story of that election is that Australians are not who Peter Dutton thought we were. And he didn't understand us, and he didn't read the electorate correctly. And for a government that has been completely battered by world events, whether it was, the Ukrainian situation, the impact of that, inflation, Donald Trump, suddenly these unexpected world events went the Prime Minister's way. And so I think Trump was a huge factor. We'll unpack all of the other factors, but I think Donald Trump really worked for the Labor Party as they did in Canada. Yeah. Jacob,
what's your take on this outcome?
Look, devastating for one side of politics. It was a resolute rejection of Bunyip Trumpism. Some sort of imported version of what passes for a winning strategy in North America. That was resolutely killed last night. Peter Dutton was not only was he not ready for government, he wasn't ready for opposition, and that was demonstrated in the fact that he couldn't retain his own seat. The performance was so bad that it actually threatens to obscure how well Labor under Albanese performed last night and in the months leading up to it. They wanted to win. They demonstrated, as you said, David, that they had the interests of the public front and centre. They were not being distracted by all the other things that tended to capture Peter Dutton. So devastating for the Liberal Party. They've got a long way to go from it.
And I want to break this conversation up. We'll get to the Liberal Party, where they went wrong, where they go from here. But for Labor, this is the sort of two-party vote they've got right now. It might come down a bit, you'd think, as the pre-polls are counted. But this is better than any two-party vote that we've seen, I think, since chiefly in wartime or post-wartime. Now, their primary vote isn't anywhere what it used to be, but it has come back from the last election. And with this commanding majority they'll have in the Parliament, David, what do they do with it? How do they spend this political capital they now have?
I think one of the challenges here is that they've got a clear mandate and a big majority where they can set a very bold agenda. But at the same time, they know the lessons from the last term and the lessons that led to this success, which is no surprises, play it safe, don't do something you didn't warn voters about in the first place. And even though I'm told that, you know, Anthony Albanese doesn't say to colleagues, remember the lesson of work choices under John Howard after the 2004 election, that lesson has seeped in. They're not going to do something they didn't warn voters about. And so
they're not about to do negative gearing change or some of these things.
Exactly. And look, they were clear about that again and again and again when asked about those kinds of things. Now, the majority is big enough for them to feel quite confident about the subsequent election. So the next term could be the kind of term where you see them laying out some markers about what they might want to do, but they would have to take that to the people in 2028.
I think there's still a danger, though, that they don't learn from the lessons of what went wrong in that first term. And it is an incredible opportunity to have a new chapter and to really, you know, start anew in terms of how they run the government and the sort of level of ambition. But I think that, you know, you have to be honest and say that there were some things that they got lucky with as well. They got incredibly lucky with Peter Dutton, who, you know, you have to say after this election result was clearly unelectable.
In terms of Labor, just sticking with them, Jacob, they have a mandate, they have a big majority, they have political capital, but, you know, as David says, nor do they want to start doing things that they didn't talk about at the election. This is the conundrum. How far do they go? Will we see a similar approach that we've witnessed in the first term?
I think you're going to see a lot more confidence in their approach. They won't be sort of finding their way, which I think we saw in the first term. Tim Fischer, the late National Party leader, I remember him telling me a long time ago, the pinnacle in the Westminster system is the second term. You've consolidated, you know what you're doing, so that's the big opportunity for Labor, and there are huge challenges coming, whether they're geopolitical, whether they're economic. And they now have a team, they've got a broad base, they've got an opportunity to seize it. And I'm sure that's what voters were also leaning into last night.
They can probably deal with events in a more confident way simply because this is such a big mandate and a vote of confidence in them.
But we know some of these events, though. There's a looming trade war, but here we've got a budget problem that needs to be addressed at some point. Can they now be bolder in addressing those issues?
They should be. They've got the majority to confront some of these major challenges, low productivity, budget deficits, more needed on economic growth. That economic agenda is vital and they should be able to get on with it, but they cannot shock the Australian people with radical measures.
And I think it's also fair to say, though, that, like, Anthony Albanese has been underestimated. And the better comparison is really with John Howard, who had a terrible first term, way worse than this government.
But he did take the big GST package to that election.
But, you know, I think it is fair to say that Anthony Albanese has been underestimated.
I mean, the funny thing is governments usually have the big mandate at the beginning. When they knock off the other side.
Then they go backwards.
Then they go backwards. That's always been the case, and this is really unusual. So they've got a gift, they've earned it,
right,
and they've got a gift.
You don't see this, a second term with a big majority. Just on the politics of the map, what we saw last night, I thought just for Labor, and we will come to the Liberals, but for Labor, apart from Andrew Wilkie's seat, clean sweep of Tasmania, and big inroads back into Queensland, where they've struggled for several elections. I just want to make this point. Annika Wells was the only female Labor MP from Queensland. Now, there are 7 of them. I understand she was told by the Prime Minister to get out there and hit these seats where they were running female candidates and run something like a teal message, if you like. And 6 women have won for Labor in southeast Queensland.
And work from home was a big part of it.
Probably helped too.
The other thing in Queensland is that Labor has done the best since 2007. An ally of Kevin Rudd, Anthony Albanese, has swept them back in some of those seats. And some of those seats, like Bonner in Brisbane, you know, maybe should have been Labor seats all along if you look at the demographics, but Labor were just shut out of those Queensland seats for so long. So it's a major result for them, and a lot of work went into finding the candidates, although in Petrie, where they're ahead, the candidate was only found 6 weeks ago. So it wasn't just about the candidates, it was about this message that resonated with Queenslanders, and amazing that that state turned against the Liberal leader from Queensland.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of a citizen's arrest in this situation for an electorate that has backed Peter Dutton for 20 years to turn around when he has a chance of becoming a Prime Minister and saying, no, we're not going to have that. It's pretty interesting.
Well, time to talk to a prominent Queenslander. The Treasurer Jim Chalmers is backing up after joining us on the election coverage in this room last night. And after a few hours sleep, he's back here for us this morning. We do appreciate that. Treasurer, thank you.
It's been too long, David.
It's been too long. After a little bit of sleep, how do you reflect on what happened last night?
It's still sinking in, David. I mean, this was beyond even our most optimistic expectations. It was a history-making night. It was one for the ages, genuinely. But to pick up on something that Sam said, which I think is right, you know, this victory does come as well with you know, healthy helpings of humility as well, because we know that there are a lot of challenges to address in our economy and more broadly. We know that people are under pressure. We know the global environment is uncertain. And we know that this second term has been given to us by the Australian people because they want stability in uncertain times, but not because they think we've solved every challenge in our economy or in our society more broadly, but because we're better placed to work towards solving some of those challenges. So there is an element of humility and there's a lot of gratitude to the Australian people.
And I want to just ask you about your approach now to a second term with a big win and a big majority, bigger than you've had in the first term. And this question about how you use this political capital, just give us a sense of how you are thinking about what you'll do in this second term.
Well, I think one of the major differences we have between some of the commentary and how we see our own government is this is an ambitious government. You think about some of the changes we've made, you know, income tax cuts, some of the budget repair that we've done, the big investments in housing, the energy transformation, and particularly in healthcare. This is an ambitious government, and we're looking forward to implementing the agenda that we took to the election. I think one thing that kind of tempers some of the discussion I heard you yourself and the counterparts over there is, remember, nobody will control the Senate. You know, it's not an outcome like we saw under Prime Minister Howard, where all of a sudden...
You'll still need the Greens there.
Well, not just them, you know, in the Senate.
I think it might, in fact, be just them that you'll have to rely on. Right. Unless you have the coalition, of course, for legislation. But anyway.
The point that I'm making is we have a big agenda. We're looking forward to implementing it with confidence, you know, with the confidence that comes from a big majority, a substantial majority in the House of Representatives.
But I guess, I mean, I hear your point about reforms that you have done in that first term, but I guess what I'm getting at here is that budget challenge in particular. We do have deficits for the next 4 years under your budget plans of about $150 billion in total. It's a structural deficit. Something needs to happen to fix that. Is that going to be a priority?
Well, that will obviously require our ongoing attention, but we shouldn't dismiss or diminish the really quite phenomenal progress that we've made in the budget in our first term. You know, a couple of $100 billion turnaround, 2 surpluses, that hasn't happened for decades. So we've made progress, but the way that Katie Gallagher and I see that challenge is that's an ongoing challenge, including in a structural sense where we have made progress in aged care, the NDIS and interest costs, but clearly that will warrant ongoing attention.
But does the scale of this win give you more confidence to do things that might not be politically popular?
Well, the way that I would see the scale of this win, I thought, again, not to... dance on the political graves of our opponents, but there was a real kind of darkness at the heart of the coalition campaign, this kind of backward-looking pessimism, which Australians rejected. And in rejecting that, I think they embraced the kind of leadership that Anthony Albanese provides, which is practical, pragmatic, it's problem-solving, and it's very forward-looking. And that's the approach that we'll take.
So when we look at what you're facing over the years ahead, the three years ahead, I mentioned the budget challenge. You've also got the Donald Trump challenge and the prospects of a global trade war and a lot going on. What are your priorities right now?
Well, first of all, I think managing this global economic uncertainty. I've already had a briefing from the Treasury Secretary this morning at 6:45.
Already this morning?
Yeah, right. This morning I had a briefing with Secretary Stephen Kennedy. I'm grateful to him for providing that briefing.
Do you talk during the campaign, or is this the first sort of proper briefing?
We speak, but in not the same way that we would engage, outside of caretaker.
Now that he knows you're back in the job for sure.
Yeah. So we had a discussion at 6:45 this morning. Back to work. Obviously, the immediate focus is on this global economic uncertainty, particularly the US and China part of that and what it means for us. And so I was able to be briefed on that, what's happening in markets and what it means for the Australian economy. So clearly that's the immediate focus. And again, I think one of the reasons why we got this big majority last night is because people recognised that if you wanted stability while the global economy was going crazy, then a majority Labor government was the best way to deliver that. So global economic uncertainty, but our agenda is really clear. We have to build more homes. We've got to get this energy transformation right. We've got to do more to embrace technology, particularly the AI opportunity. There's a huge agenda there for us, and what our agenda boils down to is obviously weathering and withstanding this global economic uncertainty in the near term, but also making sure that we make the Australian people the primary beneficiaries of all of this churn and change that we're seeing in the world. And so we've got a big agenda there, and I'm really looking forward to rolling it out.
And just on the briefing you had this morning, is there any noticeable change in the outlook for the global economy?
I think the spectrum of scenarios is much broader now. We know that the direct impact on us from the tariffs is manageable and relatively modest. But there is a huge downside risk in the global economy. I think what's happening, particularly between the US and China, does cast a dark shadow over the global economy, and we're not uniquely impacted by that, but we're really well placed. We are quite well prepared because of the progress that Australians made over the course of the last 3 years. So we go in that with a sense of, we're realistic about how this could play out in the world, but we are optimistic about Australia's place in that.
So that is still the number one concern for Australia?
Oh, certainly. I mean, for every country, including Australia. But global economic uncertainty really is the big influence on my thinking and my work on day one of a second term. And we need to have the ability, and we will have the ability, to manage that uncertainty at the same time as we roll out our domestic agenda: future made in Australia, housing, energy, technology, human capital, competition policy.
The great difficulty you faced and the government faced in the first term was inflation and all of those interest rate rises. We saw one rate cut earlier this year. Yeah. Are you looking forward to, in the second term, seeing a few more rate cuts?
Look, I'm not going to count my chickens on that front. Certainly the market expects there to be a number of interest rate cuts. I don't make those sorts of predictions. We saw a rate cut in February, and I think that did have an impact on the way people see their prospects. Consumer confidence has actually started rebounding from the middle of last year. The tax cuts, petrol prices coming down, and then the interest rate cut has slowly rebuilt confidence off a very low base. And so if we do see more interest rate cuts over the course of the rest of the year, I think that will be a very helpful way to boost confidence in the economy, particularly consumer sentiment, and also provide some cost of living relief for people.
Nearly every economist says productivity needs to be one of your top priorities as well. Is there more you can do to squeeze more productivity out of the economy?
Yes. And I'm looking forward to rolling out the changes we announced on a national regime for occupational licensing, the non-compete clauses change, the competition policy I'm working up with the states, reviving national competition policy, big priority for me as Treasurer. So there is an agenda there, but also don't forget, we commissioned from the Productivity Commission 5 big pieces of work on the main drivers, the main pillars of productivity in our economy. We'll receive that in the third quarter of this year. I'm looking forward to receiving that because we've got an agenda on productivity. But we can do more, and we will do more. And the best way to think about the difference between our first term and the second term that we won last night, first term was primarily inflation without forgetting productivity. The second term will be primarily productivity without forgetting inflation.
That's interesting. So the priority does shift now to productivity.
And a much broader sense of it. Yeah. Human capital, competition policy, technology, energy, the care economy. These are where we're going to find the productivity gains, and not quickly, but over the medium term.
Looking at the politics of what happened last night, there were clearly surprises for you and for all of us watching what happened.
I was trying to keep a lid on it on the panel.
Well, you can let loose now.
Yeah.
What surprised you the most?
Oh, Petrie, I think as David said. Petrie, if we can cling on there, that would be an extraordinary outcome. But I'm really grateful for what you said before, David, about Queensland and about these really quite remarkable women that Queensland is sending to the National Parliament. You think about Madonna Jarrett, Renee Coffey, Cara Cook, Corinne Mulholland in the Senate. We've won back that second Senate seat in Queensland, and people will be hearing a lot about Corinne Mulholland. So very, very proud of the contribution that Queensland is making to this second-term Albanese Labor government.
You won't be so lonely as a Queenslander in the Labor caucus.
That's right.
Just explain to us how it works. If you now have a much stronger Queensland contingent, does that need to be reflected on the front bench?
Well, I think there's a stronger contingent in a number of states. And so I always think you can never have too many Queenslanders. That's why I was so pleased to see Annika Wells join the ranks of the Cabinet not that long ago. We've been really long on influence but short on numbers, and now we're hopefully going to be long on influence and long on numbers. And
so
that's,
you'd be keen for another cabinet or ministry spot at least from Queensland?
I'm a Queenslander, and I think that most of the cabinet should be Queenslanders. That's just how we're born and raised. But there's a lot of good people around the country. Claire Clutterham in Sturt's amazing.
Do you expect there will be a bit of a refresh of the ministry?
Oh, it remains to be seen, and I haven't been focused on that at all. And the Prime Minister will allocate the portfolios when the dust is settled on the count. We know who will be putting their hands up for ministries, but that's not a big part of my job. It's not a big part of my focus.
Now, finally, I just want to ask about the leadership and your future. You did say last night that you absolutely would support Anthony Albanese running again for a third term.
Yes.
What does that mean for your own leadership ambitions?
Look, I've said on probably countless occasions now, if I can sit on the back deck in some period 20 years down the track and think that I was Treasurer in a great Labor government led from go to woe by Anthony Albanese, I'd be very happy with that. And I pay tribute to the Prime Minister. I can't think of a campaign where a Prime Minister has campaigned more effectively than Anthony Albanese over the course of the last 5 weeks. I think he is the biggest explanation for why we turned around the trouble that we were in at the end of 2024 to the position that we won last night. It was an extraordinary campaign, and I think he deserves to be very proud. My expectation and my hope is that he serves a full term and runs again.
You're a student of Labor Prime Ministers past. How does Anthony Albanese now sit in the pantheon?
Well, he's a Labor hero, and I think the outcome last night and the fact that his leadership has meant that we are surrounded now by even more terrific colleagues. You know, Ailey France in Dixon, unbelievable life story. You know, I think he deserves to be very proud about that. But again, coming back to where we started, you know, there is a humility here because we know that there's a bunch of stuff that we have to address together, but he has every right to feel very proud, and we're very proud of him. I'm personally incredibly proud of him. I rang him during the day yesterday. I told him how proud I was of him, and he deserves the lion's share of the credit for what happened last night.
Did you talk last night?
No, not last night. I was with you all night. I was sitting 1.5 metres from you for about 6 hours probably in the end. I'll probably have a yak with him today, but I rang him during the day before the result was known, and I said his was an extraordinary campaign. He's got a lot to be proud of, and we are certainly proud to be part of his team.
Well, Treasurer Jim Chalmers, we do appreciate you backing up this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, David.
All right, well, let's get back to our panel, and we're joined once more by David Crowe, Samantha Maiden and Jacob Greber. Look, just before we get to the Liberal side of what happened last night, I just want to pick up on what we heard there, David. I did think it was interesting, the focus on productivity there.
Yeah.
The second term focus or list of priorities does shift to productivity.
Yeah, I thought that focus on the productivity while keeping an eye on inflation, that's a really interesting message that I think reflects what the government's got to do now that it's got that second term, and there's that confidence about the agenda. It's interesting, you kind of, some of the points there are so fundamental you kind of lose track of them because we're looking at the internals. Clearly, Jim Chalmers would be happy if there's a stronger Queensland representation in the ministry.
What on earth for, Dave?
Yeah, but this acknowledgement of the sheer historic nature of the victory needs to be remembered as well because it's so huge.
Yeah, and just on the productivity point, Jacob, it's something that economists will welcome hearing, But what will that look like, I guess, is the question.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. And IR will yet again be a big feature of the second Albanese term. That's the magic sauce. That's how all of these things that Labor would like to do become possible. Without that productivity growth, we're relying on the rest of the world to deliver this stuff. That's the only bit we control directly as a government, as a country, and so yeah, he has to deliver on that. To do the things like childcare that the Prime Minister has clearly told is a priority in the second term. There's a big military burden coming.
All of those the money for all of that has to come from somewhere.
It has to come from somewhere.
Sam, on the leadership on the Labor side, Anthony Albanese, a hero, Jim Chalmers calls him. He does have now far more authority vested in him after a victory like this. He absolutely, I think, can lead them to the next election should he choose, barring any disaster between them.
He might be Copacabana for a very long time.
Well, indeed. What does this mean for the likes of Jim Chalmers, and he's not alone, others who might one day dream of having the leadership?
Well, I think that you should never make blanket statements the day after an election. You know, life can change.
Things can change.
People can decide that, you know, they want to take on other opportunities. But, I mean, I think it does clearly give the Prime Minister enormous authority. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that shifts. You know, I think clearly the Prime Minister has felt at times that he hasn't been given the respect that he would have liked. And it'll be interesting to see how he flexes those muscles.
I seem to recall, was it Nikki Savva wrote that win or lose he'd be gone in this term? I'm not so sure. I think Anthony Albanese...
No, I don't think it was Nikki, but there was that idea that Anthony Albanese would have to move on in the second term, and that was a judgment maybe 6 months ago by a commentator. I better not freewheel and try and name that commentator, but it's an interesting thing. When the polls were looking bleak, that idea that he couldn't last the second term seeped in.
That was at the end of last year. That's what's extraordinary about what's happened.
Yeah, and this result has just totally buried that. Yeah. And in some, you know, just remember, he's broken the curse of the one-term prime ministers that we've had for 20 years. And so there's a sort of return to stability. It's almost a return to what we would like to think of as normality in Australian politics with a second term.
Nothing normal about that.
Except that it isn't. Yeah. I mean, I think Menzies, Hawke and Howard in the long sweep are actually the aberrations. And we got used to them when we had two in a row, in effect.
Yeah.
Albanese now, he's not there, obviously, at that sort of level, but he's ready to be there. If he serves another year and another 6 months, he becomes the second longest serving Labor Prime Minister in history after Bob Hawke. So he's on a path. Yeah.
Let's talk about the other side. And it's a far less happy story, of course. Peter Dutton losing his seat. Sam, what happened?
Well, I think the first thing that happened is the Liberal Party got its polling catastrophically wrong.
Yep. They're already saying that this morning.
Yeah, and the thing about that is, look, it's always tricky. There are always seat-by-seat polls are tricky. But clearly they had no idea that they were in that much trouble in Dickson. And surely, you know, for heaven's sake, the idea that the pollster wasn't ringing the alarm bells. You know, it was actually on this program when you last had the Prime Minister on just after the election was called. And I remember we were standing on the set about to go on air and he was whispering to us about Dickson and saying that he thought Dickson was gettable. And I remember thinking, oh, is he playing mind games? But that turned out to be the case. But even, you know, Jim Chalmers admits that of that list of seats that they thought that they could get in Queensland, Brisbane from the Greens and Bonner was at the top of the list. And then there was a Longman and a few others. Dickson was right at the bottom of that list. So sure, it's always been a marginal seat, but I didn't think, and I don't think even clearly Jim Chalmers didn't think that that was a lock until election night.
This was a red wave.
Yeah.
What went wrong? I mean, people are saying, the policies were left too late. Jacob, it feels like this was a far bigger deal than simply leaving policy announcements too late in the campaign. Did the problem really start much, much earlier than that, after the last election?
It did. There's a whole bunch of reasons. One of the biggest was that they became seduced by news poll throughout the term when Albanese was under enormous pressure.
Well, they had their own polling, to be fair.
But I'm talking about the strategy of the coalition was this is going to be a grievance election against the Prime Minister, and that let them perhaps slide in thinking they were going to get there without doing the really hard work on policy. That became exposed when the nature of the election switched from a grievance election. I mean, quite frankly, if there was a protest vote, you would have thought it would have gone against Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party. It ended up going against Peter Dutton around the country. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And they're going to have a long time working out what it was. But they fundamentally thought this was going to be a referendum on the Prime Minister's handling of cost of living. And it was that, but it was also a referendum on the Liberal Party.
The really important thing, though, I think, is this is a generational shift, right? So we actually have to talk about the age of people in this election.
And they're just not winning those younger voters, David.
I think it's true they got their polling wrong. They got their policies wrong. The Liberals got their philosophy wrong. Fundamentally, they were not ready all the way through the term. And we can now see that because elections are the big judgment on these things, and the result is quite clear. Peter Dutton did an amazing job in keeping them unified through that term, but he kept them unified by keeping them conservative and not having the broad church that would reach out. He didn't reach out to the voters in the teal seats and say, I want you back. You know, he couldn't do that because of where he stood politically. And I think this is a bit edgy, but I've been really thinking about the fact that Peter Dutton always thought the media were too hard on him. I think in many ways the media were too gentle with him. And I think he wasn't stress-tested enough before they got to the campaign. Stress-tested on the policies, but also on his positioning. And I think if there'd been more of that stress testing, they would have been readier for the campaign.
That's an interesting...
He should have done more interviews.
I want to come back to this conversation about what's gone wrong, but first we're going to hear from Keith Wolahan, who is one of those Liberal MPs who looks like he's lost his seat. They're still counting to go. One of the, well, two remaining seats the Liberals held in metropolitan Melbourne before last night's result. Before we hear from Keith Wolahan, I want to show you what Simon Birmingham said on this program, same time, day after the election, 3 years ago. He was at the time the Liberal Senate leader. He then left Parliament, but he gave some sage advice the morning after the 22 defeat that was ignored.
We've lost the professionals out of the Menzies script, and we need to make sure we win back many more of those professionals, and especially Australian women who are much more highly educated today, thanks to wonderful opportunities provided by successive governments, and it's a cohort that clearly we have failed to have represent us in sufficient numbers, and we need to make sure we turn that around, as well as the types of policies necessary to appeal to them.
Keith Wolahan, welcome to the program. And I want to say at the outset, I appreciate you sticking to the commitment you gave a few days ago to turn up, win, lose or draw this morning on Insiders. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So is it a win, lose or draw for you, first of all, in your seat of Menzies? At the moment, our ABC count has you losing the seat, but are you still hopeful you might come back?
I'm told from those that are in the counting room, it's still too close to call, but it is a long shot. So it's more likely than not that I will lose it, but not at conceding stage yet.
All right, so what do you put the result down to that we've seen nationally for the Liberals, which is clearly a crushing defeat?
Well, before I do that, I have two tasks to do. One is it's my daughter's 10th birthday. I said I would look down the camera and wish Eva a happy birthday. So happy birthday, Eva.
Very happy Eva, birthday Eva from all of us.
Thank you. The other is to my opponent, Gabriel, who sent a text message about Eva as well. I want to congratulate him and his team. He should be very proud, and he's a decent person, and if he is the member for Menzies, he will be a good one. I also want to thank the people of Menzies, my party, my volunteers, my family and everyone who ran as a candidate and people who lost their seats throughout this country. Some really sad losses for our party, but I am confident that the party will rebuild and our future is still a bright one.
Still, last night we've seen the Liberals, I think as Peter Harcher put it, all but evicted from the cities, from the urban seats right around the country. Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Hobart, where you didn't have a presence. But how do you feel about that, and what do you put that down to?
Yeah, this is something I've turned my mind to for 3 years, ever since on election night, was only 45 votes ahead last time, and it was clear that our party has an issue in urban Australia, which is where most people live. Most people live in cities. So we need to turn our mind to that like we have never done before. We need to really dig deep and think about who we are and who we fight for and who makes up Australia. And I saw that clip from Simon Birmingham. He is right that there are professional people, professional women, younger people who are worried that they'll ever own their own home again. We also have multicultural Australians and people who don't have a memory of the Howard Costello era. And so we need to acknowledge the cities that we live in, not the cities that we used to live in or think that we live in.
And are there specifics that you're getting wrong, or the Liberal Party's getting wrong, that are really hurting your chances with those people you talk about? I'm thinking of the work from home idea that had to be killed off. Was that the sort of thing that is going to turn off women in particular?
The specifics of those I'm going to leave for the review, because the review can't just be any other review. It's going to have to be a serious review that takes time, and there will be hopefully many chapters. But more importantly, I hope that it's a review that's not just put on a shelf somewhere. It's actually one that's read again and again and again.
Is that what happened last time?
Well, perhaps. I mean, there were chapters and paragraphs in that I think we offended throughout the campaign. But again, that's for the next review. And it should be a serious one. It should be a comprehensive one. And because there's a lack of metropolitan members in the party room, I think we need the rural and regional members who I have great respect for and I admire them, and they have done an amazing job to put themselves in the shoes of Australians who live in an urban area. And that's where we can't just go off perception, we have to go off the perspective of someone else. And if we do more of that, then again, I think our party has a bright future.
So how do you do that? Because half of your party room will still come from Queensland. And of course, the Nationals will have proportionally a bigger say in the joint party room meeting when the coalition all gathers together. So how do you champion in the voice of the very few remaining urban-based Liberal MPs?
We listen, and so whoever the leader is and whoever the senior team is, but everyone, if you're in that party room, that is a great honour. I think we need to get out into this country, come to Melbourne, and if I'm not there, I will be a constructive voice for the party. I will help them try and solve this problem so that we can provide a vision of hope for the country, because I think as a party we're very nostalgic. We look back to our heroes, whether it's Menzies or Howard or Costello, and that's great. But I think we need more than the rearview mirror. I think we need to look through the windscreen and say this country's best days are ahead of it, and we can be a force for good about aspiration, opportunity and hope. If we do that, again, I think the Liberal Party has a bright future.
I appreciate you want to go through the process of a review looking at the policies, but there is one policy that I need to ask you about: nuclear. Did this hurt the Liberals in the cities, and should the Liberal Party stick with nuclear power?
Again, it wouldn't be fair on me to dissect that particular policy, but everything should be on the table and that should be analysed. So again, whether it's through focus groups, internal discussions and talking with experts, but we have to listen to Australians. They have sent us a message and our first task is to hear it, and that often takes time.
How would you describe the campaign that Peter Dutton ran?
I think, again, when there's a result like this, you have to acknowledge things went wrong, but I'm not going to pick that apart here on the Sunday afterwards. That's for the review. But likewise, if we had done better, then people would have said it was all perfect. There were things that were done well, there were things that weren't done well, but the review needs to go through all of those and have honest conversations with people.
Was Peter Dutton himself a problem?
I've greatly admired Peter Dutton as a leader and as a patriot of this country, his service to our country. And again, I'm not going to criticise Peter on this. My heart breaks for him and his family. And again, I thank him for his service as a leader of our party. And let's not forget where we were through this term, that there were periods where there was great successes. And that's down to Peter and his leadership. But again, all of this will come through in the review.
What about the economic approach taken by the Liberals in this election, opposing a tax cut from Labor, promising to reverse it, promising 2 deeper deficits over the coming 2 years? What did you make of the economic policy offering?
Again, I won't dissect the particular policies, but I will say this. I think with what's happened in the United States, people are looking for predictability again. And if you're putting policies to the electorate in the final few weeks of a campaign, they feel like it's unpredictable. So if we are true to our values and we prosecute the case early, and some of the things we need to prosecute are: how do we address debt? How do we address productivity in this country. And if we do that in a constructive way and early, run the case, run the arguments, I think then Australians will trust us that we may be given the authority to be in government one day, but we have to earn that back again.
The party now has no leader, with Peter Dutton out of the parliament. Who should it turn to?
Well, I'm probably not going to be in that party room, so that's not a choice for me. And I respect my colleagues and their decision, and that's a process that they'll go through. So
you know some of the contenders well: Angus Taylor, Susan Lee, Dan Tehan. Am I talking about the right names here? Is there anyone I'm leaving off the list, Keith Wolahan?
Look, because of where I'm at with my seat, it'd be no surprise I'm not on any of those phone calls right now, but we'll see how the count goes. But again, I respect all of those names, and there may be others that aren't on the list. I'm not going to inject myself into that decision.
No, well, I'll try one more time, as is my want. But the three I mentioned there are the three, I guess, main contenders, and they all represent regional areas of the country. You're talking here this morning about the need to get back to focusing on the urban areas to regain ground there. Are there any options in the cities? Julian Lisa was mentioned by someone to me. Are there options that you have in the city that you should be looking to lead the party?
They're all good people, but again, this is where perspective matters. You don't, for instance, people have commentary on war or veterans and they haven't been to war or veterans, and that's okay. You can be a good Prime Minister and leader of a metro area if you have perspective, if you put yourself in their shoes, and all of those names, they're all capable of doing that.
All right. Well, what about your own future, Keith Wolahan? If you don't come back there in Menzies at this election, will you come back in 3 years' time and have another crack?
I don't know. I'll see how the count goes. There are still many thousands of votes to be counted, and I'll enjoy Eva's birthday today with her. She deserves my full attention. She hasn't had it for a long time, and same with my son Leo. I love them both very much, and I'll spend the rest of today with them, and in the coming weeks we'll gather as a family, and we will rebuild and regroup. I wasn't born here. I served this country overseas, and there was times when I might not have come home. So I'm a very grateful person to my family, to my country, and I'm so grateful to the people of Menzies who gave me that chance. And if it was just for those 3 years, I thank them for it, and it was the honour of my life.
And I just wanted to ask you about that, because viewers who may not know, you're a barrister, you're a former Special Forces soldier. You speak Mandarin. You're someone who's worked very hard a little bit. OK, well, you've worked very hard, better than me, I'm sure, over the last 3 years trying to win back the votes of Chinese Australians to the Liberal Party. You were seen by quite a number of your colleagues as a potential future leader, the hope of the future for the Liberal Party. So how does that feel for you now? You would be aware of that expectation on your shoulders to lose your seat and to see the party crushed as it was last night. How does that feel personally?
Look, again, it's you let yourself go to the process, and I saw some of those comments and they're flattering, but I'm grounded and humble. I always thought my first task was to hold my seat, and it looks like I won't, and that's on me. I take full responsibility for that. I don't blame anyone else. That is for me. But I am grateful for the opportunity that was given to me. But I'm still a youngish man, and I love the Liberal Party. I believe it is a force for good in Victoria and this nation, and I will always be loyal to it and be there to help it.
Well, Keith Wolahan, as I said, we do appreciate you joining us this morning in difficult circumstances, but a very happy birthday to Eva once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's get back to our panel. We're joined again by David Crowe, Sam Maiden and Jacob Greber. And David, Keith Wolahan, I guess being careful there about the policy changes, and they might need to be radical, that are to come. But the one thing he did point out very clearly was the need to focus on the interests of urban areas, of the metro areas, of professional women in particular, as Simon Birmingham mentioned 3 years ago. Are they going to listen to this advice?
I think they've got to now, because they'll be reduced to such a small group in Parliament that the only way for them is to have a total review and a total rethink about what they stand for. But that interview was all class, wasn't it? Because that's somebody who's fronted up the morning after what looks like a very bad personal defeat for him, and been so totally gracious. And of course, when you talk about the Liberal leadership, Keith Wolahan is somebody who others in the Liberal Party have pointed to as a potential leader for the future. And so they've got to rethink where they stand philosophy, philosophically. You know what I'm trying to say.
It's been a big night.
It's been a long day.
But they've also got to find a path forward so they can get people like Keith Wolahan back into Parliament.
I've got it, Jacob.
That was all class from Keith Wolahan, and it was a demonstration, an explicit demonstration of what the Liberal Party has lost, potentially in Keith overnight, looks like it, and what they've lost generally, and it didn't just happen last night. Since Tony Abbott, the Liberal Party or the coalition has lost close to 50 seats in a 150-seat parliament. Wow. This is a structural problem that the broad church that John Howard created has not been able to come to grips with. Those numbers are devastating, and you saw last night that some of their future talent is being sacrificed because of poor choices, poor strategy and poor execution.
Sam, he doesn't want to, step on the toes of those who are remaining, who have to navigate where to go on policy. But what's he talking about, do you think, when he talks about the need to connect with professional women, with young Australians as well, with those in the seats that they're losing? What are the policies?
Well, I think that the problem that the Liberal Party has with women is huge. And, you go right back to the John Howard era where Amanda Vanstone was very isolated in cabinet. They didn't have a lot of women. The Tony Abbott government came in. They had one woman, Julie Bishop, and a whole bunch of excuses for years of why they couldn't have more. And then under Scott Morrison, that improved. But there was always a sense that women are not having a real seat at the table. So they'll let Susan Lee be the deputy leader, but she's kind of on the outer and she's not really in with the boys. They'll give Jane Hume the finance portfolio, but they don't think she's really good and they'll talk about her behind her back. Now, if they really want to do something, the people that they should be promoting is people like Zoe McKenzie if she hangs on to her seat.
Flinders.
They don't, like, the person who should be the opposition Treasury spokesperson is Allegra Spender. Unfortunately, she's not in the Parliament, right? They don't have these women. And they communicate a message all the time. When Peter Dutton says, oh, we're going to do something, work from home, oh, can't you job share? All these women are just thinking, you are out of your mind, right? And so they don't think that they're in touch. So the Teal story is a terrible story for the Liberal Party because not all of those women, I mean, Monique Ryan, I think is more Labor, Greens, but a lot of those women, they should be in the Liberal Party. They should be leading the Liberal Party. They should be future leadership contenders. And so they have to do something about tackling that in a serious way that doesn't involve allowing Susan Lee to mop up the mess for a couple of years before they pop in Josh Frydenberg.
So is that what's going to happen here, do you think? Let's talk about the leadership. I mentioned a few names there. I think Dan Tehan, Angus Taylor, Susan Lee are the three that are being talked about. I'm hearing that, there's a considerable number who aren't thrilled with the idea of Angus Taylor that will get behind Susan Lee. What do you think, David?
Well, I think Angus Taylor owns a lot of the outcome because I do think that they had an economic vacuum for a lot of the term and they were late with setting out their economic plan. They would talk about Australia heading to catastrophe under Labor, and yet they didn't come up with a compelling plan to fix that catastrophe in their eyes. So I think there's ownership of the outcome. With Susan Lee as Deputy Liberal leader, she was a high-profile Liberal through the last term and into the campaign, but I don't think she owns the outcome in the same way, and that may be a factor.
I don't think we saw a great deal of it during the campaign.
Yeah, but I mean, owning the policy outcome in the same way as Angus Taylor is a bit different. Dan Tehan's interesting because he showed he could be a survivor. He, in a sense, he read the writing on the wall, went back to his own home seat and had to fight for it.
Did he get a swing? I remember checking towards the end of the night. I think he had a swing towards him after preferences.
Yes. But things moved so fast last night. I wasn't sure of the latest number for him, but he was a survivor and he knew what to do to hang on.
The rest of them copped.
And look, Andrew Hastie in WA, former soldier, defence spokesperson, clearly had some issues in the campaign in terms of his personal views on women in combat. That was a negative for him. He should have got over that 6 months ago and got that out of the way. But he is somebody for the future. Whether now is the time is a huge question.
Yeah, Jacob, what do you think of the options right now?
None of those are from Queensland, I think, which will be a big change for the coalition that we're talking seriously about. I agree with David. I think Angus Taylor has some baggage that will, and it all depends on what the numbers are in that party room in the end, whether he gets through. He does seem to want it. He's pushing that way. Labor seemed to take him seriously. Jim Chalmers last night twice kind of crossed a few lanes of traffic to have a crack. And so I mean, this is the problem with what happened for the Liberal Party last night. The two-term strategy, the clock has been reset to zero.
Yeah, we're looking at another 2 terms.
So whoever gets that job,
Sam, does anyone
it'll be
have
tough.
an edge, do you think? What are you hearing?
Well, I think that they're all not great options. I think that's the reality. Angus Taylor is burnt by the fact that he couldn't come up with a current tax policy. Susan Lee has her own issues, and Dan Tehan, I think, is someone who is, quite a nervous performer sometimes in the media, but probably underestimated as well. But I don't think they're all long-term options.
Now, I want to just talk about the others, because we've seen another big vote for the others. The Greens, it's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. They've lost those 2 Brisbane seats. Max Chandler-Mather out in Griffith. They've lost Brisbane as well. Looks like they'll hold Ryan. They're still hopeful about Richmond, I think, on the north coast of New South Wales. They're still hopeful about Wills in Melbourne, knocking off Peter Khalil there as well.
Yeah.
And their Senate vote, funnily enough, looks pretty strong. It looks like Labor will have to rely on the Greens, 28 Labor, 11 Greens, I think, to get to the 39 they would need to pass.
And they may not need the rest of the crossbench.
They would need the rest of the crossbench. So that puts the Greens in a strong position in the Senate. But in terms of the lower house, still don't know. Adam Bandt himself is in trouble in his seat of Melbourne. Here he was last night defending their performance.
One thing is clear, though, is that we have kept Dutton out. One of the things that may happen is that as we see the two-party system start to decline and they embrace each other more and more, we may see the situation where some Labor MPs get elected on Liberal preferences.
Yeah, so look, at least they help get Peter Dutton out is the point there. Where are the Greens left after this?
That is the kind of thing that you say on the night, but it takes time for the reality to sink in, because Labor kept Peter Dutton out. I don't think the Greens kept Peter Dutton out. I don't think you can see that in the numbers in the lower house.
A major majority.
And there's a difference between the Melbourne dynamic and the Brisbane dynamic, where I think a lot of the things the Greens were talking about through the term, especially foreign policy and Gaza, didn't really resonate with those Brisbane voters. Right. Mind you, Max Chandler-Mather was an incredible campaigner on housing, and it still didn't work for him.
His energy over the course of particularly the first year or two of this parliament was amazing. He did get under the Prime Minister's skin, you saw it, and maybe him losing his seat is a little cherry on top for Anthony Albanese.
Oh, I think that's definitely a cherry on top.
Explain to people that when you have these three-cornered contests, right, you don't necessarily have the Greens vote collapsing. What actually happened in Max Chandler-Mather's seat is that the Liberal vote collapsed. That's what actually happened. If you go look at the vote that the Greens got in 2022 and the vote that they got in 2025, it's not that different. It's just that when the vote splits that way in 3 ways and the Liberal vote fell, that's what allowed Labor to get up.
Labor put in a lot of effort over a very long period of time, specifically in those Brisbane seats, Brisbane and Griffith, letterboxing, targeting the Greens over their obstruction on housing, as the government was saying, the Gaza issue, and the sort of, again, this is an election, I think, about the centre. The Greens were standing up supporting bad actors like the CFMEU. They were, whipping things up, and you can see even their own environmental base saying, well, what are the outcomes here?
And maybe too late to shift to that domestic issue that was working for them in many ways.
The big
dental into Medicare and the big toothbrush.
That big toothbrush.
But that was relatively late. So we've talked about the Liberals being...
the big toothbrush.
We've talked about the Liberals being late with some of their policies, but maybe that was also true of the Greens.
The big toothbrush, the Medicare card, the memories of election campaign 2025. I just want to quickly point out the independents have had a good night. They have held their seats. There was a question mark with the Teals or Climate 200 back independents, whatever you want to call them, would they hold their ground? They did, and they look like they might expand their number on the crossbench. We're looking at places like Flinders, Cowper's still in place. So there's still the potential for more independents to emerge as the count continues. Let's talk to one of them, though, right now, Zali Steggall, joining us here in the studio, who has won her seat of Warringah now for a 3rd time. Zali Steggall, congratulations on that 3rd win, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So what are your thoughts then on how the independents went last night?
Look, I think in New South Wales, independents have done really well. It's great to see Nicolette Buller. I think Brad Phil has been exciting. A lot of work's gone into that. They've done so much on the ground. I'm still very hopeful that Zoe Daniel in Goldstein will hold on. Monique has done really well. And we've got to remember the News Limited media and third-party groups, right, that were active actors in this election threw everything at those campaigns to vilify and just it was vicious, some of those
I was going
campaigns.
to ask you about the nature of this campaign compared to previous ones you've been involved in. Was this one nastier?
Maybe not for myself here in Warringah, but I think nationally there were pockets where it was vicious. What we saw was the growth of those third-party actor organisations. So we saw in the referendum Advance Australia, who ironically started with me back in Warringah in 2019, but they have grown in confidence and they've given way to splinter groups. You've got, you know, Jason Falinski, an ex-Liberal MP, behind the Australians for Prosperity. You've got Better Australia, Advance. You've got a lot of these attack fronts for the Liberal Party with a lot of money from fossil fuels attacking in these communities.
It does seem like, as I said just before, you know, this question mark was there. Would what we saw 3 years ago be a one-off, or would this become a permanent realignment of our political landscape? It's looking more permanent right now. Is that how you see it? Is this, are the Liberals going to have any chance of getting back into seats like Warringah, Wentworth and so on?
Well, I think the question will be, are they capable of listening? I saw some grabs of Jacinta Price last night and my indication would be no. There's still, what's missing is they've abandoned concepts of liberalism. Where they are now is a Conservative Party. Number 2 on most of their ballot papers was One Nation, followed by trumpets, right? So we're talking a very conservative agenda and a preference system. And I actually had many voters come to me offended, saying they were previously moderate Liberal voters. Absolutely no way were they, 1, voting for Peter Dutton, but B, offended at the idea that the second preference went to One Nation.
Now, are you disappointed it's not a hung parliament outcome here, where independents, crossbenchers would have more clout?
Well, I dispute that because I've been in Parliament for 2 terms now. I've been under a majority coalition government and a majority Labor government. And each time we have been able to work collaboratively with the government of the day, push the agenda. I've committed to be a champion for climate action and integrity, and we are moving those things. I'd like to see them move faster. I won't always agree with the government in relation to every issue, but I am very prepared to work collaboratively, positively with them. And I think that is what Australians endorsed last night. They're saying no to that adversarial populism that we've seen from a Peter Dutton-led coalition, but also from the Greens on a number of issues. And in fact, it was, I think, more respectful, positive community independents have held their ground or increased. And I think that's what Australians are looking for.
And what will be the priorities you want to pursue with the Albanese government? It won't need your support. It will have a commanding majority in the House. But what will be the sort of issues you would like to push with the government?
Well, there'll certainly be no excuses not to be more ambitious. They have a clear opportunity now to be more ambitious on climate change, on our transition.
So that target, the 2035 target in particular for climate?
Well, it's long overdue. We should have had it by February. We know the Climate Authority, for example, has provided a national risk assessment to the government. We need a response to that. We need to start preparing Australia and investing in our resilience. I've proposed a climate resilience plan. I look forward to discussing it with, if it's Chris Bowen or whoever, or the Prime Minister. I think we have to start safeguarding Australia, protecting them from the risks ahead. I agree with some of the comments Jim Chalmers just made. We need an innovation-driven Australia. Our economy needs to grow. We need to embrace the future. If there's one message that was clear last night is Australians aren't for going backwards. We want to keep progressing. We want a positive future. We want stability, but we also have to start embracing the new world. And I don't think the Liberal Party or the LNP at the moment are listening to the Australian people. They still do not have a coherent climate policy.
I've asked this question of Allegra Spender and others over the last couple of years, and I'm keen to ask it at this moment after this election result. Is there any sense, do you think, in independents, like-minded independents such as yourself, forming more of a bloc, even a party, to establish and give yourselves greater influence with the government and greater negotiating clout? Is that something worth considering now?
Well, look, we've sort of been grouped together by the media. You know, you are repeatedly referring through who we're backed by, and I should note that at no point do we refer to the Liberal Party as being backed by Gina Rinehart or who the funding they come from. So even when the ABC refers to independents as Climate 200 backed independents, that's inappropriate if it's not going to be matched with other candidates.
Well, I just say there is coordination, though, in some of the campaigning
Sure,
that's done.
But again, this is what we're talking about. We have made sure that the model of how you can campaign is available to all. We've paid it forward when it comes, and it's through work of like the Community Independent Project, holding publicly available conferences and forums to help communities in all over Australia. If they are dissatisfied with their local representation, how can they do it better?
I take that point. You're not a party, but you do work together and do have some common funding and campaigning, teams behind you. Back to the question, is there any sense, do you think, in going that next step, whether it's a party or some other sort of formal bloc that can negotiate with the government, that can take positions that give you more power?
Well, I think there's also great power in flexibility. And so our current model works really well. We've worked very respectfully together. We're very aligned on values. We want to see merit-based policies. We want to hold the government of the day accountable. We want scrutiny and accountability. But we also want to be able to represent our communities above all. I think there's something a little broken with the current party system where on the Labor side, they are stuck with their rules. They cannot cross the floor, and so communities will at times be very disenfranchised. Or the Liberal Party, where very few cross the floor because they face disendorsement and they don't get re-elected. So I think the world has moved on from that traditional convention of how we see political parties now, and it's maybe time for a new model. And I think that's what community independents offer.
Zali Steggall, we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We're going to get a closer look at what happened last night, the state of play, based on the count as it is, but also some of the interesting developments we saw in different parts of the country, particularly Tasmania and Queensland, with ABC elections analyst Casey Briggs.
Yeah, morning, David. Let's start with the chamber. We are getting a sense for what the next Parliament of Australia will look like. Here are the seats that we have as one for one side or the other. As of Sunday morning, we've got Labor on, that's the last Parliament. We've got Labor as of Sunday morning on 85 seats. The Coalition have just gone up to 37. And let me add in some seats that we think are likely. That gets Labor to 88. Of the seats in doubt, Labor's ahead in 5 more, so it's got a credible pathway to a seat total in the mid-90s. The Coalition's ahead in enough seats to get them into the mid-40s, but there's still a bit of counting to go. But it seems likely the Coalition's going to end up with less than half the seats as the government. Here are the national primaries. Labor with 34.6%. The Coalition is down about 4 points to 31.7. The Greens are roughly steady. It's a rare feat these days for Labor to beat the Coalition on primary votes. Here's the two-party preferred votes. Labor on 55.4, Coalition 44.6, and we're looking at a swing of more than 3% toward the government. Let's just compare those numbers to some previous Labor wins. Under Kevin Rudd in 2007, Labor won 52.7%. Under Hawke in 1983, they won 53.2%. Under Whitlam in 1972, 52.7%. Under Chifley in 1946, 54.1%. Rudd, Hawke, Whitlam, Chifley, Albanese's beaten them all. How about the opposition's catastrophic night? Well, let's look first at the primary votes in Tasmania. In Tasmania, to start with, the Liberals there are down to under a quarter of the vote, and we're looking at a statewide swing of more than 8%. There are no more lower house Liberals on the Apple Isle. The Liberals also hold no seats in Adelaide. They've gone backwards in Melbourne, Sydney and Perth too. The Liberal Party needs to work out how to win back city seats. And then there's Queensland, where Labor's made serious gains. Have a look at a few seats. They've won the seat of Bonner. Cara Cook becomes the next member for Bonner. They've won the seat of Petrie. Luke Howarth has been ousted. Emma Cummer is the new MP there. And of course, the big headline of the night, they've won the seat of Dixon. Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, defeated in the northern Brisbane suburbs. Labor's also won Griffith and Brisbane from the Greens, so Labor's finally made some gains in a state that it's been struggling with. Let's have a look at the 2PP across Queensland to get a sense of what's happening there. This is the only state where the coalition is leading that count. It's a blue stronghold. It remains a blue stronghold for the party. And this is the state that's delivering a great chunk of the coalition's seats. On the current count, about half the coalition's lower house MPs are from Queensland. Nationally, the Liberals have gone backwards by more than the Nationals, so the Country Party, David, will presumably have some more influence in the joint party room in the next parliament.
Casey, thank you very much for that. I want to pick up on that final point there. The Nationals have had a pretty good night. Certainly compared to the Liberals, there's a prospect they could pick up Bendigo from Labor. They were certainly confident of that throughout.
I'm not sure I'd characterise it like that. They've gone backwards. The LNP in Queensland has struggled.
Yeah.
They are in trouble with one of the Senate seats in New South Wales for the first time. They may not...
The Nats.
The Nats may not pick up a Senate spot in New South Wales. And the general impact of David Littleproud's big idea being nuclear, the general impact of that on the coalition partner,
broadly,
the utterly devastating impact that's had, there'll be a price to pay for that within the National Party. So I don't think it was... wasn't
bring back Barnaby Joyce?
Up until now, they've tended to survive these setbacks.
Yeah.
The National Party... the setbacks have been all with the Liberals. But it's not quite the same.
I take that point.
I don't know where they go.
But their setbacks were nothing like the Liberals. And to Casey's point, they will end up proportionally... with a bigger chunk of the joint party room than they had.
And with demands on the ministry or shadow ministry.
Exactly, before they had yesterday. So the Nats will have more clout in the coalition is the point, because the Liberals have gone back so much further.
But it gets to that point of, clearly on the numbers, they've got a big base in Queensland still, despite the setbacks. Do they need a Queensland leader? Well, you know, they've got to make this calculation about choosing a direction on policy and leadership.
You're talking about the Liberals? Or
the Liberals,
yeah.
Sorry, and the coalition generally. Do they choose a leadership and a policy structure that suits the base that they've got now, or is built for the people they want to win back at the next election?
Yeah, why would they go for that? I mean, Littleproud has driven them onto the rocks as a movement, as a political movement, with the nuclear plan. And he's gone backwards in... There's seats that the Nats have held that were never in question, but have a look at some of the votes. And nuclear was an issue there.
I mean, this is going to be the live debate in the coalition. There's going to be a lot of live debates around policy, but nuclear is such a big one, and I suspect within the Nats, we know there are some who think that Australia should follow Trump and get out of the Paris Agreement. Does that become a live debate as well? But nuclear is first and foremost one that they're going to have to resolve pretty quickly.
It's always a live debate, isn't it? They always come back to this Paris energy. But even in the final days, Peter Dutton was committed to Paris, right? He got the question in the last days of the campaign. So there's nothing in this election that says, oh, the solution is to get out of Paris.
But I think the only way they're ever going to be able to form government again is just to level the show to the ground, right? I mean, they've never really had a big generational shift, even really from the Howard years, because you think that Peter Dutton goes all the way back to the Howard years. Now, of course, the Howard government was a very successful government for the Liberal government in terms of the Liberals, in terms of continuing to come back, but they're just strangled by this orthodoxy, really, and they've never been able to move beyond that. And they've also had this killing field of leaders. You know, the opposition leader at this election probably should have been Scott Morrison, who would have been a very effective leader. And then you would have had Josh Frydenberg as a backup. But all these people are gone.
Just back on the energy debate, Jacob, because this is, I'm just thinking about this. Given the Liberals wouldn't have any chance for another 3 years now of getting started on this, most likely another 6 years, if it's another 2 terms of Labor, you know, you wouldn't get the first nuclear power plant built until, gosh, we're right into the mid-2040s and the 2050s and the 2060s. Coal's long gone by then.
It's risible stuff.
Nuclear.
It's risible stuff.
If it ever was...
You've got to fix the problem in the here and now.
If it ever was a realistic option, it's really not now, is it?
No, it's not serious. Because of the challenge of replacing these coal-fired power stations that are going out. Gas is probably the simplest mix, but more fundamentally about the parties and the ideologies that they represent, it doesn't appear to be working to have an organisation that has room for a Matt Canavan and a Barnaby Joyce at one end and a Keith Wolahan at the other end. Maybe, and this is what a lot of Conservatives have told me in the hours since we got those results last night, maybe they do need to go their own way for a while, rebuild, have an actual fiscally conservative Liberal Party, a trial separation.
You wanted to go on a break.
And the people who've drifted to the far right can go hard in that direction.
And leave the Liberals to face this enormous challenge of getting back the voters who are clearly deserting them for the Teals, because the fact that Bradfield in Sydney, in the leafy North Shore of Sydney, with a hardcore Conservative Liberal branch in it, has gone to Nicolette Buller as a independent candidate. It's another, blow to the Liberals.
I mean, I remember talking about this on this show the morning after the Morrison defeat 3 years ago, whether the coalition should split and spend some time in opposition apart so that they could rebuild these Liberal seats they just lost to all those independents. It has messiness with it too, though, right? I mean, how do you go?
But is this model working for them? I mean,
it's not.
I mean, even the Voice debate, which people got excited about when that re-emerged with the Penny Wong comments to, I think, the Batuta Advocate, that was leapt on, and the Conservatives said, "Aha! See, they still want to do it." All it did was remind a whole bunch of actually moderate Liberal voters in a seat like Bradfield, where the yes vote was, I don't know, it was huge. It was 80%. That this Liberal Party is not their Liberal Party.
But I think they've got to move on from the bunker mentality with the media as well. Whether they, the Labor Party doesn't like the media all the time, but they engage with them in a healthy and normal way. And I think that would be one of my concerns about Andrew Hastie, who I think is a very impressive person. But I mean, if you want to talk about Peter Dutton's bunker mentality with the media, I mean, go take a look at Andrew Hastie. These people, they need to actually learn to engage with journalists in a healthy way.
Although I'm told the bunker mentality went beyond the media. It was with his own colleagues.
No, but it's a good point. We would say this in the media. But if you want to talk to the Australian people, it's a pretty helpful way to.
They talked to the echo chamber and they believed the echoes that they were hearing back on Sky News late at night.
The call was coming from inside the House.
Yeah. All right, and just quickly, Labor points out to me that I mentioned Richmond, where the Greens were a chance. They reckon they're no chance. Labor's going to. They're confident they'll hold Richmond. They're ahead in Wills.
Well, that's disappointing. I would have been interested in a bit of Mandy Nolan, but we'll have to miss out this
time.
The comedian, he said she wanted to enter politics and. For some rather exotic reasons I won't mention at this time of the morning.
Labor's confident they'll hold on to Richmond. All right, our panel, Jacob Greber, Sam Maiden, David Crowe, will be back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm photographer Mike Bowers. I've called in Australia's preeminent coach of political muscle to talk all things election, and a very warm welcome.
Well, that's former government coach now, Mikey. I'm now a freelance consultant.
It looks like the Labor Party has squeaked back in.
Well, yeah, I mean, full credit to Albo, first returning captain since GST Johnny back in 2004.
David Rowe's got this lovely cartoon, Politic Eggs now, soft-boiled Dutton.
Albo there with his little silver spoon.
Hard-boiled Dutton and APS toast.
This is, of course, potentially also referencing Dutton's egg moment in the debate.
Yes.
Although, a bit of a rookie error to say, oh no, it's my wife who does the shopping. Surely it's a political staffer.
Coach, Fiona Katauskas has picked up on the hate media. That's the thing about the hate media. They're always trying to whip up fear and division.
No one ever won elections based on joy, hope and optimism.
Yeah, well, I think, fear and division's a nice catchy little thing. We could have had wedge and sledge.
Doubt and clout. Are drugs and thugs making you too scared to go to the shops? Vote me. Now preferencing Pauline.
What has Welcome to Country ever done for you?
Stop foreign students taking our homes.
There are moments during a campaign when the photographer just gets that peak action, which just makes it a millisecond before and after it wouldn't have worked.
It looks like a little bit of a tough day on the beers. I'd say there's a little bit of gas going on for Duts. Amelia's basically staring down the future of her party, thinking, when will you all shuffle off and retire so the youth can take control?
Coach, Peter Dutton faced questions of fitness to lead, but the Prime Minister's form hasn't been great, has it?
Well, until a couple of weeks into the campaign, it looked like it was toast, didn't it? But things I think took a turn when he fell off the stage, denied he fell off the stage, then briefly admitted to having fallen off the stage, and then recanted that admission. But look, here we are, things got better.
beautiful Mark Knight cartoon who has, seems to think the Prime Minister's got a bit of a train wreck here with cost of living, cheaper power bills, the voice, green hydrogen. Dutton can't make so many mistakes on the campaign and then expect people to vote for him.
Well, it's an interesting juxtaposition, isn't it, Bowers? Because you've got, of course, the government's record of 3 years in office versus what has been a pretty woeful campaign by the coalition. And so what do the voters think? We found out last night.
Johannes Leek seems to have the arsenal of the Prime Minister here.
Unprepared, my arsenal.
Yeah.
So here we have effectively Australia's entire defence plan laid out with, we've got lean on the Yanks, hope for the best.
She'll be right.
Talk.
Empty promises and fingers crossed. Chris Downs has got the federal race. You don't have to be the fastest, you just have to be faster than your opposition.
Indeed, you've got to make sure there's no stages to trip over as you're running.
Coach Clive Palmer wasn't exactly best and fairest on the pitch, but he certainly commanded a lot of attention.
Sorry, my phone's just buzzing. No, it's another Trumpets text, sorry. Democracy sausage fingers at work.
Yep.
Text message vote.
Texting away. Text message vote, trumpet. Text message trumpet, trumpet. Text message voice.
Do you think Trumpets has caught on as a bit of a catchphrase?
No, bugle of bull dust, I think, really. Beautiful Matt Golding, the primary school kid learning to play the recorder of Patriots.
Parents of primary school children currently learning the recorder, our thoughts and prayers are with you.
Mark Carney went elbows up during the recent campaign and went full on against Trump. Is there any truth to you were coaching elbows up?
I indeed took some money from Canada to advise them. I'm not tied to any political party these days. I go where the money takes me, and I was pretty proud of our campaign in Canada.
Beautiful Kathy Wilcox here, who's got the maple grief with the old fingers up and the American flag.
There's something in that. We're talking about changing the flag in Australia all the time.
I think it was a win for MAGA, wasn't it? Make America go away. David Rowe here, Maple Matador. It's ole hey.
David Rowe's images are both things of beauty and nightmare fuel.
They certainly are. Brett Lethbridge's bowling ball of Trump here takes out the Canadian Conservatives and probably the Australian coalition.
It's always the case, you suck up to the cool kids, but then when they stop being cool, you're left exposed.
Yeah. Matt Golding, I think, has summed it up for all of us.
Where to watch the election, and there we all are.
Under the couch.
Cowered under the couch.
I think we're in a very interesting phase of politics. Thank you for coming and flexing your political muscles with us this morning. It's been a great pleasure.
Only for you, Mikey Bowers, and well may we say full credit to democracy. Back to you, Spears, you mad dog.
Thank you, Coach. And thank you, Mike. Time for some final observations. Just a few quickly. We saw Clive Palmer there. We didn't get to mention him earlier. Spent all that money again, didn't win a seat. He did promise last night to stop texting us all, which is one small mercy.
The flugelhorn of failure.
Exactly. I do like that. It's getting a bit silly now. What else was I going to say? The Greens and Labor will have numbers in the Senate to pass legislation. So Labor will, it's expected, either go with the coalition to pass a bill or with the Greens. So they won't need any other crossbenchers in the Senate. And Nikki Savva, I mentioned earlier, her forecast the Prime Minister wouldn't see out this coming term. She did, however, forecast the other day that Peter Dutton and Keith Wolahan would be in real trouble of losing their seats.
Do not mess with Nikki. She's coming for you now.
Exactly.
You look out.
Jacob.
What
do you got?
Looking forward to Donald Trump's first personal tweet, or maybe even an SMS to the Prime Minister, although, as we know, he doesn't do it that way.
Does he
doesn't have it. Just a final observation on Peter Dutton. I think he's a much warmer, funnier person than he ever comes across in public. And I think in the end, Jim Chalmers started with the old Joseph Conrad quote about hearts of darkness. I'm going more to Macbeth. Nothing in his political life becomes him like believing it, in the case of Peter Dutton.
It was a classy speech last night, in a difficult night, no doubt. Sam?
Yeah, I thought it was a very beautiful and respectful speech from Peter Dutton. I've always had a special relationship with him, of course, because he did accidentally once text me and call me a mad something expletive witch. But, look, he is a funny guy. We wish him the best. But I do wish, for the Liberal Party's own sake, that they can move beyond the land of the blue tie, the moving shots of 4 men wearing the same suit and wearing the same suit during the election. Maybe they should try some ladies. It's a crazy idea.
Might just work, David.
OK, I'll see if I can say all this quickly. On Trump, it's interesting, he loves winners. And so that could hold Anthony Albanese in good stead when that visit to Washington, D.C. comes. But my main point was going to be a self-indulgent one. I'm leaving Canberra after 20 years. I've got a new gig at the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, so I want to say thank you.
Tell us the new gig.
It'll be in Europe, covering mayhem there instead of mayhem in Canberra, and it's sad to leave this setup here, but I hope that you'll have me back in a couple of years. And on that note, I also wanted to acknowledge that all the people who campaigned and all the people who fought to hold their seats, there are so many good people in politics. We're very conscious sometimes of the narcissists and the awful people. And by the way, wasn't it a shame that Clive Palmer didn't do all that well? But there are so many good people.
Don't hold back.
And they will be a loss. We saw that with Keith Wolahan's remarks, and I wish them well.
Yeah, really well said, Dave. This is why we're going to miss you on the Insiders couch when you go to Europe. Maybe we can send a couch over to London to...
and a webcam.
Beam to you over there. But no, mate, thank you so much for all of your contributions on this program. It's always terrific to have you on. Thank you all very much for analysing a huge political moment. It's going to be still a busy time ahead, I'm sure. Thanks for your company this morning, and thanks to all the crew who've turned the election set into the Insiders set overnight for us as well. Finally, some say it's a sign of good luck. It certainly proved to be for Monique Ryan, who held her seat at Kooyong last night after this messy moment earlier in the day. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Hi, Monique. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Just very briefly, if we can just ask how you are. Oh, we've got a. I don't know. Was that a bird? I hope that wasn't a bird. I
think it was a bird.
But it didn't get. Did it get you?
Yeah, it did.
Well, some people say
there's more coming out of the tree.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.